enjoy your conversation, and a quote. So first, ups and downs. Raise your hand if you're always in a good mood, you're never grouchy. I had a feeling some kindergartners were going to raise their hand. We'll ask your parent. Well, I'm going to ask your parents, okay? Okay, so most of us, or maybe when we get older, we all have ups and downs. You can look at that on a large scale, but even like I'm thinking this morning, even in the course of a given day, just this day alone, you could have ups and downs. You could have times when you're happy and times when you're sad. When you're healthy, you could have an upset stomach after lunch. There's good times, there's bad times. So it could be just even, like I said, over the course of a day. You could look back over maybe a longer period of time and say, you know what, that was a really difficult stretch for me. Like that was that was a really difficult time for my family. Or that was a really blessed and happy time for me over the course of maybe my 8th grade year. Or it might be looking back at sometimes saying, you know, that was a really happy time for my family. Whenever we're like, a lot of times this comes about the different seasons in one's life, right? So before one like takes big steps, like before one becomes a priest, before one gets married, what does the priest say and ask the couple to recite to each other? They say, I promise to be faithful to you in good times and in bad, in sickness and in health, right? Because there's going to be those times, good times and bad times, sickness and in health. We heard from the first reading in the book of Ecclesiastes. In the Bible, it's called the wisdom books. And so Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, the book of Sirach, the book of Psalms. I think it was 4th grade class memorized another Psalm yesterday to me. Those are good things. Those are good verses to memorize because the wisdom books they tell us how to live a good life. And part of overall the whole book of Ecclesiastes, kind of the message we heard in this first reading is the fact there's a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, a time to dance, a time to be silent, a time to speak. God has made everything appropriate to its time. That's just to say, boys and girls, the message of the book of Ecclesiastes is to say, God is in control. Even the things that happen that we don't have control over them happening, that has an impact on whether, we're healthy or sick. Sometimes we can be sick by eating badly, but sometimes we might just get sick because it's out of our control. God's in control of everything, which brings me to our second point. Enjoy your conversation. Our gospel today, Jesus is talking to the crowds and he's saying, who do you say that I am? And the disciples say, well, some people say you're this, some people say you're that. And Jesus says, who do you say that I am? And so just like back then, today's the same way, boys and girls. Some people say that Jesus is just a really nice guy. He was a guy who lived a long time ago, but he was just a really good guy. Jesus, or he was just a really wise person. He had some really good teachings. So he's a guy that we should listen to and follow the way he talked and to put his principles into practice. But boys and girls, we don't believe that Jesus was just a nice person or that he was a really smart guy and then he had good practical wisdom. Peter's answer was, you're the Christ, you're the Messiah. You rose from the dead. We talked about that last week. But he's a person. God is a person, meaning he's one who's more real to us than the person we're sitting. Everyone look to the person next to him right now. Jesus is, in some ways, we would say, more real. As we turn and we look at the person right next to us, Jesus is even more real than them. And they're like I can touch them. Which brings me on Wednesday, I was walking over to the church, and as I was coming, the fourth graders were coming in to spend some time in adoration, and then the second graders, Miss Benz and the class, where they at? Over here, they were leaving, and so as they were leaving, they told me, "Hey, Father Mark, we were just praying," and I said, "Well, that's where I'm going to go." And as I'm walking in, I turn away from them to walk in. Miss Benz said to me, as I'm leaving, she's turning around and she just very casually says, "Enjoy your conversation, Father Mark. Enjoy your conversation, Father Mark." And that's exactly right. And you know what? Her saying that put me in the right perspective of when I came in here to pray. Because Jesus is so real, boys and girls. When we have the ups and downs, and I think at that time I was maybe a little sad. Miss Benz didn't know that. Second graders, you probably didn't know that. But she just said, "Enjoy your conversation, Father Mark." And you know what? I came into church and I enjoyed my conversation with a person, Jesus. Lastly, I want to end with a quote. Today we celebrate the Saint Padre Pio. Padre Pio was somebody who lived not too long ago. He died just a little over 50 years ago. So again, we won't ask if there was any teachers alive or anybody here when he died. But somebody he's a saint that we have like the black and white pictures of Therese of Lisieux, but we actually, for Padre Pio, we actually have videos of him. And he was a saint who God gave a very special gift to. It was called the stigmata. And the stigmata means that he was a priest, and when he would celebrate Mass, he would have the wounds of Christ start appearing in his hands. You know how Jesus was nailed on the cross? Padre Pio would start to bleed from his hands. Because the priest, when celebrating the Mass, we talked about this before, it's the sacrifice of the Mass. And the priest takes the person of Jesus and offers himself to the Father as Jesus. It's a sacrifice that happened 2,000 years ago. This is what's being made present on the altar. And that's what's going to happen here in a little bit. God gave Padre Pio this gift, but guess what? A whole bunch of people would come out to see him, would come to his Mass. They would see his hands bleed. But the church would say, "We think this guy might be crazy. We don't know if we don't think we believe him." And they sent him away. They sent them away and said, "You're not allowed to celebrate Mass in public anymore. You can celebrate private on your own." So he entered into a pretty down time in his life. And guess what? His conversations, that's what sustained him, boys and girls. He enjoyed his conversations with Jesus. So, boys and girls, let us remember guys like St. Padre Pio. Guys like St. Padre Pio, we may not have the gift or even the cross or the stigmata, but the Lord's given us other gifts. And sometimes with those gifts bring trials that he calls us to do. And it's going to bring us ups and downs in life. God is in control through those ups and downs. And in the midst of it all, boys and girls, we want to remember to always, to a person who's Jesus, who's real, who is real as the person who's sitting next to you right now in the pew, to always seek him out and enjoy your conversation.